What if I told you a sultan once forced his harem of concubines to, well, perform with animals? And no, this isn't some gross little rumor whispered in a tavern. It's an actual historical scandal, written down by stunned chroniclers who probably needed a drink afterward. Forget reality TV, because medieval royalty was running its own horror show, complete with sex, power, and a level of cruelty that makes Game of Thrones look like Sesame Street. And the kicker? These rulers weren't fringe weirdos. They were sitting on thrones, commanding armies, and shaping empires, all while treating human lives like toys in their personal circus. History class really skipped the part where foreign policy sometimes meant ordering women to mate with animals. So buckle up, pour yourself a stiff drink, and maybe get your therapist on speed dial, because this is going to get dark. And hey, if learning about history's worst people helps you feel better about your own dysfunctional family, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I promise, the past is way messier than your last breakup. Let's get right into it. Number 1. The Sultan's twisted experiment. Imagine you're a concubine in the Ottoman Empire. You're locked away in the palace harem, thinking your biggest problem is surviving the cutthroat politics of jealous rivals. Then suddenly, the Sultan orders you to mate with animals. Yes, actual animals. Lions, donkeys, dogs, you name it. According to some chroniclers, Sultan Ibrahim I, nicknamed Ibrahim the Mad, had more interest in turning his harem into a grotesque freak show than actually governing his empire. Why? Historians still debate it. Some think it was about humiliation, an emperor's way of proving absolute control over women who were already stripped of freedom. Others think Ibrahim had a taste for perverse science, as if watching these pairings told him something about nature, fertility, or fate. Or maybe he was just sadistic and bored. When you're an absolute ruler with no one to say, "Stop, this is insane," you can get away with things that would make a modern courtroom explode. One chilling detail, and it wasn't just private. Reports claim he sometimes invited others to watch, because what's better than abusing power? Abusing power with an audience. Basically, Ibrahim turned the Ottoman harem into the world's darkest reality show. Forget Love Island. This was Beast Island, and the prize was psychological trauma for life. Number 2. A palace of fear. Now you might wonder, how could women endure this nightmare? The answer, fear. In the Ottoman harem, the Sultan was practically a god. Concubines who disobeyed risked torture, execution, or being sewn into sacks and tossed into the Bosphorus River like yesterday's laundry. Saying no wasn't an option. It was a death sentence. What's worse, these weren't just random women. Many concubines were captured in war or enslaved from conquered lands, ripped from their homes as teenagers, and forced into palace life. By the time they reached Ibrahim, they were trapped in a gilded prison where their bodies weren't their own. And if you think Ibrahim's animal obsessions were his only twisted quirk, think again. This was a man so paranoid, he once ordered the execution of 280 of his own concubines because he suspected them of plotting affairs. Imagine being told, "Congrats, you're promoted to the Sultan's favorite. Oh, and by the way, he killed the last 200 women who got that title." Talk about a workplace hazard. The harem wasn't a place of luxury. It was a cage, where fear was the wallpaper and death was always lurking. If today's HR departments had to deal with Ibrahim, the whole empire would be slapped with lawsuits before lunch. Number 3. Madness on the throne. Picture this. The fate of one of the most powerful empires in the world rests in the hands of a man nicknamed Ibrahim the Mad. Yeah, not exactly the resume you want for your supreme leader. Born in 1615, Ibrahim spent much of his early life locked up in the cafes, a gilded cage where Ottoman princes were isolated to prevent them from plotting coups. Cute idea, except it usually drove them insane. And Ibrahim? He took the insane part as a personal challenge. When he finally became Sultan in 1640, after his brother Murad IV died, the empire hoped for stability. What they got was a ruler who treated politics like improv theater. He ordered lavish spending on silks, jewels, and exotic animals, while the empire's treasury bled dry. He's remembered not for great reforms or military victories, but for indulgence, paranoia, and his bizarre fetishes. Think about it. One of the largest empires in the world was essentially run by a guy who'd make your drunk uncle at Thanksgiving look like a Nobel laureate. If Ibrahim were alive today, he'd probably be trending on TikTok for all the wrong reasons. Mad Sultan Challenge. Instead of steering the Ottoman ship, he was drilling holes in the hull. So, the harem horrors weren't random. They were the side effects of putting unchecked power into the hands of someone who should have had a padded room, not a throne. Number 4. Concubines as status symbols. Here's the thing, concubines weren't just sexual partners, they were currency. The Ottoman Sultan's harem could number in the hundreds, sometimes even 1,000 women, each representing conquest, tribute, or sheer flexing of power. Collecting concubines was like having the ultimate baseball card set, except instead of cardboard, they were actual human beings. And while some rose to power, like the legendary Qasem Sultan, who basically ran the empire through her sons, most were expendable. If Ibrahim wanted to humiliate them with degrading experiments, who was going to stop him? Nobody dared. Their lives were less about love or desire and more about political symbolism. You weren't Ibrahim's girl, you were the empire's trophy. It's kind of like being a luxury handbag. You didn't get to choose your owner, and if you fell out of fashion, you could be discarded. Only, instead of being tossed into a closet, you might end up drowned in the Bosphorus. Talk about high stakes. So when chroniclers describe Ibrahim ordering animal pairings, it wasn't just about kink or madness. It was also about demonstrating dominance over his collection. Imagine a ruler so drunk on power, he treats human lives like chess pawns, except the chessboard is soaked in blood and trauma. Number 5. The zoo fetish. If most rulers brag about their armies, Ibrahim bragged about his zoo. The man was obsessed with exotic animals. Lions, tigers, elephants, you name it. Owning a menagerie was common for powerful kings, but Ibrahim blurred the line between royal petting zoo and nightmare fuel. He reportedly spent ridiculous sums on importing beasts from across the empire and then used them as props in his twisted sexual fantasies. Think about that. Instead of showing off his lions at parades or using them to intimidate enemies, he made them part of his private, let's call it, circus of doom. Imagine you're a terrified concubine, and suddenly you're shoved into a room with a leopard that doesn't want to be there either. That's not exotic luxury, it's sadism disguised as entertainment. Of course, Ibrahim's love of animals didn't extend to kindness. He was said to once feed his concubines to wild beasts for disobedience, as if women were just another type of meat on the menu. This wasn't ruling, it was horror cosplay, starring himself as the dungeon master of the empire. So while European kings flaunted diamonds, Ibrahim flaunted lions, and his flex was less royal glamour and more Animal Planet rated X. Number 6. The execution frenzy. You know how some people panic clean their house when stressed? Ibrahim panic executed. His paranoia grew so extreme that he once accused his entire harem of betrayal and ordered a mass drowning. Roughly 280 women were bound, stuffed into sacks, and dumped into the Bosphorus. Let that sink in. An entire floating procession of corpses, drifting downstream, all because one unstable man thought they were sneaking around behind his back. The irony? The Sultan, who had spent his reign orchestrating humiliations with animals, suddenly couldn't stand the idea of women possibly being unfaithful to him. This massacre is one of the most infamous examples of Ottoman cruelty, remembered centuries later as proof of what happens when unchecked power meets unchecked paranoia. And it wasn't just tragic, it was spectacularly stupid. By killing off so many concubines, he destabilized palace politics, angered factions, and wasted the very system designed to secure heirs. Basically, Ibrahim treated his harem like a personal Netflix subscription. When he got bored or suspicious, he hit cancel all. Only in his case, the cancellation policy involved sacks and salt water. Number 7. The jewel obsession. If you think shopping addictions are a modern problem, Ibrahim would like a word. He was notorious for blowing the empire's money on jewels, silks, and lavish palatial upgrades. He reportedly demanded a diamond-encrusted cage for his pet birds, because apparently, regular bird cages weren't blingy enough for Ottoman parrots. But his crown jewel, literally, was his fixation on a massive pearl. He had an entire palace chamber redesigned just to showcase it. Some sources say he'd sit for hours, staring at this pearl like it was a portal to another dimension. Imagine ruling one of the largest empires in history and deciding your best use of time is vibing with a shiny rock. The kicker? While Ibrahim indulged in his luxury obsessions, his people were groaning under heavy taxes and food shortages. Citizens weren't exactly thrilled to hear their sultan was pouring resources into gem collections and animal sex circuses. It's like finding out your landlord spent your rent money on NFTs of bananas, wearing sunglasses. So yeah, Ibrahim wasn't just cruel, he was reckless with money too. Combine sadism with financial irresponsibility, and you've got the Ottoman Empire on a one-way ticket to chaos. Number 8. The women who fought back. Now here's the twist. Not every woman in Ibrahim's orbit was helpless. Enter Kösem Sultan, his mother, and one of the most powerful women in Ottoman history. Kösem had already acted as regent for Ibrahim's older brother and was a seasoned political operator. She knew her son was spiraling, and she wasn't about to let his madness sink the empire entirely. But confronting Ibrahim wasn't simple. The harem was a boiling pot of rivalries, spies, and whispered schemes. Kösem had to walk a tightrope, protecting her influence while keeping her son from collapsing the dynasty. Some accounts suggest she even tried to rein in his worst impulses, though given the animal experiments and mass executions, it's safe to say she didn't succeed often. Still, Kösem played a long game. She built alliances with viziers, courtiers, and palace factions who were equally fed up with Ibrahim's chaos. Eventually, she helped pave the way for his removal, proving that in the Ottoman palace, women weren't just victims. They could also be the puppet masters pulling strings behind velvet curtains. Basically, if Ibrahim was the empire's liability, Kösem was its crisis manager. She didn't save everyone, but without her, the Ottoman ship might have sunk decades earlier. Number 9. The straw that broke the Sultan. Every tyrant has that one moment when the court collectively goes, "All right, that's enough." For Ibrahim, it wasn't the animal experiments, the mass executions, or the pearl obsession. Nope. It was when he demanded that the palace treasury be emptied to fund yet another round of luxury binges, silks, jewels, and exotic pets. By this point, the empire was bleeding cash. Soldiers weren't getting paid, provinces were restless, and the viziers were tired of covering for Ibrahim's antics. Imagine your boss throwing lavish office parties while your paycheck keeps getting lost in the system. The Janissaries, the elite Ottoman soldiers, finally had enough. Their loyalty wasn't infinite, especially when stomachs were empty. This financial recklessness made the court realize Ibrahim wasn't just eccentric, he was dangerous. Empires can handle cruel rulers, they can't handle broke ones, and once the money dried up, so did his authority. His mother Kösem and the viziers started quietly sharpening their knives, metaphorically speaking. So yes, the final straw for a man who ordered women to mate with animals wasn't morality, it was money. Turns out, bankruptcy kills tyrants faster than conscience ever could. Number 10. The coup of 1648. The end came swiftly. In 1648, palace conspirators, led by high-ranking officials and with the Janissaries' support, stormed into Ibrahim's chambers. He was dragged from his luxurious bed, bewildered, probably clutching one of his pearls for comfort. Instead of being revered as God's shadow on earth, he was thrown into a cell like a common criminal. For a few weeks, he lingered in captivity while the empire debated what to do with him. Some hoped he might be spared, but honestly, how do you spare a man who executed hundreds of concubines and bankrupted the empire? The viziers weren't looking to babysit a deranged ex-sultan. On August 18, 1648, Ibrahim was strangled with a bowstring, Ottoman style. No messy executions, just a quiet end in a dark room. His reign had lasted only 8 years, but it was enough to leave a legacy of terror, humiliation, and instability. Ironically, his death was probably the kindest thing he ever did for the empire. With Ibrahim gone, the Ottomans could finally start patching up the mess he left behind. Number 11. History's Judgment. Here's the funny thing about history. It never forgets the weirdest details. Plenty of Ottoman sultans ruled for decades, expanded territories, and pulled off dazzling reforms. But ask people about Ibrahim, and what do they say? Oh yeah, the guy who made women sleep with animals. Not exactly the legacy you want carved into the history books. Historians often frame Ibrahim as a tragic product of the Cafés system, driven mad by years of isolation before being tossed onto the throne, but sympathy only stretches so far when you're ordering mass drownings and perverse spectacles. At the end of the day, he's remembered less as a ruler and more as a cautionary tale about what happens when unchecked power meets unchecked insanity. His reign didn't just hurt the empire, it scarred hundreds of women, destabilized the palace, and gave the Ottoman dynasty a black eye that took years to heal. Ibrahim wanted to be adored like a god king, but history branded him as the Mad Sultan, and in a twisted way, that's immortality. Number 12. The Dark Lesson. So what's the takeaway from this gruesome saga? Simple. Power without limits turns people into monsters. Ibrahim. I wasn't just a bad ruler. He was living proof that when one man has absolute control over life, death, and human dignity, disaster is inevitable. And here's the kicker. It's not just dusty history. Look around today. Leaders who hoard wealth while their people starve. Check rulers who treat women as disposable property. Sadly, still happening. Ibrahim might have been the Ottoman poster child for cruelty, but his story is really about how dangerous it is to let any one person play God. If there's a moral here, it's this. Maybe democracy isn't perfect, but at least it prevents your boss from ordering a zoo-themed sex party on the company dime. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.